I don't recognize Canada as the country that I was born in, grew up in. It's beyond the pale of what I could have ever anticipated.
His minister blames travelers, and the world has embraced restriction-free travel. The Canadian Chamber of Commerce, the Airports Council, and now health experts are telling this government that their outdated COVID restrictions have to go. Who's actually telling the government to keep those restrictions?
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I would like to ask my colleague, he brought up tourism, and I want to talk to him about air travel. In page 74 of the budget, there is an announcement of $105 million over 5 years for something known as the Known Traveler Digital Identity pilot project. A Google search of Known Traveler Digital Identity takes us to the World Economic Forum document, which is called the Known Traveler Digital Identity Concept, which is talking about things like attestations of citizenship, educational degrees, and so on, including vaccination for viral disease. I'm wondering if my colleague could expand on just what the government is investing tax dollars for on this front.
That ArriveCan has obviously been a very important tool during COVID-19 and remains important for those people that enter into Canada to identify whether they are appropriately vaccinated. But increasingly, ArriveCan is also being used to facilitate and accelerate entrance into Canada through customs data entry, which in many cases makes it quite fast and quite efficient to enter into Canada.
Oh, give us your fine.
Yeah, you'd see
we'll take a fine. We'll take a fine.
That's fine. And your passport's right your fine.
No, you don't need our passport.
Yes, I do. You can't tell me what to do my job. You cannot tell me what is required of me when I write the fine.
But since she's not a fully vaccinated traveler entering Canada, she's required to be quarantined for.
Under what provision of law?
Sir, the Quarantine Act that they put in.
What is going on with Canada? Man, I do love to know the answer. Alexa Lavoie for Rebel News, and today I want to expose the collateral damage of innocent Canadian citizens and tourists due to Trudeau's radical border restriction. It seems that since COVID-19, our highly secure passport is no longer a reliable tool to verify travelers. While most countries are lifting health restrictions, Canada has implemented a forced quarantine for non-vaccinated people, a random PCR test, and the mandatory installation of an electronic app called ArriveCan. All this plus the fact that many people who work in airports were fired or laid off during the pandemic as a cost-saving measure due to their vaccination status is creating mayhem. Now, without this electronic pass, ArriveCan, you would risk a fine of $5,750. And the app has problem. Sometimes it doesn't work. But that is not all. Refusing to submit to the PCR test results in another fine, the same one of $5,750. A forced quarantine for all non-vaccinated yet perfectly healthy people and those who test positive or refuse to disclose their vaccination status have been added to the restriction that could result in more fine. Look at these horror stories that occur in custom at the airport.
I have the ArriveCan app and he does not.
Okay.
He has his proof of documentation showing that he's been vaccinated. That's all that's required.
I will be flying by myself, and I don't have a cell phone, but if I'm flying by myself, how can I do that?
Are you guys related?
Yeah.
So what's the problem with putting it on your account?
I don't think I should have to.
Why not? What's the answer?
Nancy, never mind. This is bureaucracy gone amok. Well, let's see. You've got my COVID shots. I've had 4 of them.
Okay, that's good.
You have my passport.
Okay.
Why not let's just do the paperwork and get this over with?
Because they want the app. The government wants the app.
I'm designated in the province of Ontario to issue contravention fines if people do not comply. So if you do want to comply,
give us a fine.
Yeah, you'd see
we'll take a fine. We'll take a fine.
That's fine. And your passports to write your fine.
No, you don't need our passport.
Yes, I do. You can't tell me what to do with my job. You cannot tell me what is required of me when I write a fine.
But I will hold on to the passport.
No,
you'll give us back the passports when you're done with them?
You will get it back. They're not going to keep it. They just need your information to make sure. And then you.
I also need to verify your vaccination status.
No, we do not need to discuss that information.
That's another fine.
Okay.
Good. Put it on. Add it to the fine. Add it to the fine.
On the law.
No. Add it to the fine.
The law. When you travel, there's consequences if you don't follow the rules. Okay? So this under the Quarantine Act, unfortunately, the Quarantine Act, there's still rules that you must follow.
Sure, yeah, rules. Just like in World War II. There are lots of rules then too.
Sir, there's no need for rhetoric.
Then just do your job and take our passports and give it and take an hour.
Boarding passes, sir.
Despite recovering from the coronavirus within 118 days of returning to Canada, David Frey's daughter had to undergo a forced quarantine. You may know David as the popular content creator Viva Frei. To make sure the population respect the requirement, compliance agent called the different individual targeted to make sure they respect this quarantine.
Screening officer working under the Federal Quarantine Act. Today I'll be asking a few questions about Viva's quarantine to verify that she's in compliance with obligation, include a day 1 and a day 8 COVID test. This call should just take a few minutes. Unvaccinated traveler entering Canada who do not meet the Canadian definition of fully vaccinated are required to be in quarantine for a minimum of 14 days.
Oh, excuse me. In virtue of what is she supposed to be in quarantine for 14 days?
Because she's unvaccinated.
No, but what that's not my understanding of the law.
What do you mean your understanding of
what provision?
Law?
What provision of law are you suggesting requires my daughter to be in 14 days of quarantine?
She's under the Federal Quarantine Act, sir.
What provision of law? Because she tested negative. We've had COVID within the last 180 days.
I understand that. So she's not required to be tested again. But since she's not a fully vaccinated traveler entering Canada, she's required to be in quarantine for...
Under what provision of law?
Sir, the Quarantine Act that's been put in place.
Faced with all this, who would want to visit Canada? Today, I'm speaking with Viva Frei about ArriveCan and also about the forced quarantine. So let's get right to it.
We had gone out of the country for 72 hours. And I considered myself to be relatively up to speed on the rules. And on the ArriveCan app, there specifically is a section for under exemptions, which asks you about prior infections and whether or not you have medical certificate to confirm a prior infection. Under the section of exemptions. So we had this trip planned. It was a 72 hours to the States. And then coming back, complete the ArriveCan app, fill out the sections on exemptions, upload all the stuff, scan our passports, yada, yada. And that's it. That's all we hear about any requirement to quarantine because it's a 12-year-old kid traveling with a fully vaxxed at the time. Not sure if I'll be up to date in the future. With a fully vaccinated adult, both of us had prior infections within a certain period under the exemption section of the ArriveCan app. And we get through and that's it. 5-6 days go by until I get a call from a number that I don't recognize from someone who purports to be a screening officer asking me how my day 1 and day 8 testing with my daughter is going and how her quarantine is going. And I just was flabbergasted and asked, what are you talking about? In virtue of what do you think that I have to compel a 12-year-old kid who's healthy, tested negative before leaving and before coming back? In virtue of what am I supposed to understand that I'm compelled to quarantine a healthy 12-year-old kid for no less than 14 days? The person, whoever it is, and I don't even know if it's a government agent, just couldn't answer. And just couldn't answer and was giving me conflicting answers and saying, checking to see on your testing requirements for day 1 and day 8. And then later on in the call says, oh, well, yeah, I know you've been infected, so you don't have to test anymore. When I just started off this call by saying that you did. They don't know what's going on with whatever are the rules in their mind any more than anybody else does. And what they're asking parents to do, quarantine a healthy kid. not because they're sick, tested positive, or have symptoms, but simply because they're unvaccinated, is nothing shy of government-sanctioned child abuse, period. The issue with the ArriveCan app in particular is not the fact that the government is vetting and vetting who comes into the country. It's that it's wholly invasive. They make you scan your passport. They make you answer a series of medical questions. They make you answer a series of questions as to where you're going to be, where you're located. Do you have a plan in the event that one of you tests positive? And then they require, in the event that you're obligated to do it, a series of filling out a questionnaire every day for 14 days, responding to, they call you up under the ArriveCan app and menacingly ask you questions that I know that they already have the information to. They ask you questions that they already have the information to because you already filled it out by virtue of having uploaded your stuff to the ArriveCan app. And my mind is they do it solely to intimidate you, to say, well, we're just double checking that you're answering the questions right and that we're asking you the same questions now that we asked you on the ArriveCan app. The ArriveCan app in and of itself is nothing shy of full dictatorship, full fascistic 24/7 surveillance of people entering the country. And setting aside the fact that the requirements to compel healthy people to quarantine for no less than 14 days, not because they're sick, not because they're symptomatic, but because they're unvaccinated, it's something that deserves not just international attention, but international reprimand, because it's quite clear that there's not enough pushback nationally for what is going on. Coming from a government that has now knowingly been spying on its citizens through apps and downloads onto their cell phones and computers. This has been confirmed now, has been knowingly, unlawfully gathering data from cell phones and mobile devices, has been using the military to test propaganda, military propaganda on the citizens under the pretext of COVID. I mean, these are three things which people will hear, will probably think sounds conspiracy theorist, and they don't know that it's simply confirmed fact at this point. I no longer recognize it as my country. I think it was Cicero or I think it was Cicero who said more laws, less justice. They are creating endless administrative state, endless bureaucratic state, endless additional laws and regulation. And if you fail to comply with them, they destroy you through excessive, economically crushing fines and worse sometimes. I don't recognize Canada as the country that I was born in, grew up in. It's beyond the pale of what I could have ever anticipated. It's excessive. It's tyrannical, and it's ultimately just oppressive. It's all under the pretext of for the greater good, health issues, yada, yada. This is beyond health at this point. When all the other countries of the world virtually are pulling back the restrictions, even Australia, undoing these discriminatory vaccine passport requirement policies, other countries are pulling it back. Justin Trudeau is dialing it up. And it's obvious. It's obvious why. He is the most corrupt prime minister Canada has ever seen. 2 times confirmed ethics breaching prime minister, 3 times charged, scandal after scandal after scandal. The only way to avoid discussing the scandals is to create a situation where people are living in perpetual fear, where all they're discussing is how they can survive on a day-to-day basis through all of this COVID restriction nonsense and never actually address the most corrupt and unethical prime minister in Canadian history. Divide and conquer. It's the way of Justin Trudeau. And all of this, it's unscientific. It's absolutely unconstitutional. And more importantly, it's absolutely discriminatory. I'm concerned that even according to Klaus Schwab himself, over half the Canadian cabinet has been penetrated by the WEF.
But what we are very proud of now is the young generation, like Prime Minister Trudeau, President of Argentina and so on, so that we penetrate the cabinets. So yesterday I was at a reception for Prime Minister Trudeau, and I know that half of this cabinet, or even more half of this cabinet, are for our actually young global leaders of the World Economic Forum.
I'm concerned by the fact that Justin Trudeau seems to have more allegiance to global initiatives, to international interests than to national interests. But the bottom line, This is a power-hungry tyrant, and the only way that they can cling to power is by perpetually dividing, perpetually creating crises for the government to manage so that nobody talks about the fact that Justin Trudeau is the most unethical, corrupt prime minister Canada has ever had, and more important than anything, he's the most unscientific hypocrite of a leader the world might have ever seen. And it's time for Canadians to start realizing that at some point, enough is enough, and you can't wait until it affects you to say enough is enough.
So as you know, at Rebel News, we started a petition because we want to challenge legally and send a message to the government to stop that app. So you can sign the petition massively at noarrivecan.com, and as well you can donate generously, so that will help us with the cost of our lawyer and to challenge it legally with the justice.